In the harsh and unforgiving territories of the Arizona frontier, where justice often freezes in the cylinder of a gun and mercy is a warmth few can afford to kindle, an extraordinary story of redemption was about to unfold. It was the dead of winter, 1885, a season that usually brought a ceasefire to the hostilities of men, yet cruelty knows no calendar. The wind howled through the canyons like a grieving widow, carrying with it the bite of a frost that could snap a man's bones as easily as dry kindling. In this frozen wasteland, two identical Chinese twins, torn from everything they had ever known, were about to discover that sometimes salvation arrives not from a preacher or a lawman, but from the most dangerous man in the territory. A gunslinger haunted by the ghosts of his own violence would make a choice that defied every convention of the West. This is a story about the true meaning of family, the price of freedom, and how love can bloom even in the bitter snow of human cruelty. Snow flurries kicked up by 50 horses and wagons hung in the air like a white, suffocating curtain over the makeshift auction ground outside the mining town of Silver Creek. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve, a date that would freeze itself into my memory forever, etched in ice and blood. I hadn't planned to be there that day. My business was usually done quickly, supplies, ammunition, and a bottle of whiskey to drown the memories of the past. But a delayed shipment of grain had kept me in town longer than expected, and a morbid, sinking curiosity got the better of me when I heard the commotion near the livery stables. What I saw when I reached the shivering crowd made my blood run colder than the winter wind biting at my cheeks. It wasn't cattle being sold, as I had assumed from the noise. It was people. My name is Julian Thorne, though most folks in this godforsaken territory just know me by the iron on my hip or the silence that follows me when I walk into a saloon. I'm 42 years old, and I've seen enough of this world's darkness to fill several graves, many of which I dug myself. I served as a hired gun during the range wars, fought in duels that still haunt my sleep with the smell of black powder and copper, and lost my wife, Clara, to a fever 3 years ago. Since then, I've lived alone on my ranch at Shadow Creek, a recluse trying to make peace with a past that refuses to stay buried. But nothing in my experience, not the wars, not the duels, not even the death of my beloved Clara, had prepared me for what I witnessed that frigid afternoon. The auctioneer, a greasy, portly man named Cornelius Graves, stood on a makeshift wooden platform, his breath pluming in the icy air like dragon smoke. He was hawking human beings like they were livestock, his voice booming with a false cheer that grated against the solemnity of the holy day. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory gleam, "we have some fine specimens today. Strong backs for the mines, nimble hands for the household, whatever your needs might be on this festive eve." The crowd was a mix of rough-looking men, miners with coal dust permanently etched into their skin, ranchers with callous hearts, and drifters whose intentions I didn't want to contemplate. They examined the captives like they were inspecting horses, checking teeth and muscles, discussing their potential uses in voices that turned my stomach. Most of the prisoners were laborers taken from railroad camps or men who had defaulted on predatory debts, all chained together and shivering in the snow. The sight should have been illegal, a violation of every law of God and man, but Sheriff Maddock was right there in the crowd. He wasn't there to stop it, he was there as a potential buyer, smoking a cigar and laughing with a mine foreman. Then I saw them. 2 young Chinese women stood near the end of the line, and something about them immediately arrested my attention, pulling me in like a moth to a flame. They were identical twins, mirror images of grace amidst the squalor. They wore tattered grey traditional Keongsams, silk garments that were beautiful but woefully inadequate against the Arizona winter. Their skin was pale, almost translucent from the cold, and they shivered violently, yet they held a proud bearing that seemed to defy the chains binding their slender wrists. They looked to be about 20 years old, thrust into a nightmare they clearly did not belong in. What struck me most was their defiance. While other captives showed varying degrees of resignation or terror, these two stood tall. The twin on the left had eyes that burned with a protective fury, a fire that seemed to say she would kill to protect her sister. The twin on the right held a gaze of quiet, unbreakable dignity, a calm ocean that refused to be disturbed by the storm. "Now here we have something exotic," Graves announced, rubbing his gloved hands together as he approached the sisters. Identical Chinese twins. A rarity in these parts. Look at them, young, strong, and distinct. I guarantee they'll work hard with the proper motivation. The lewd chuckles from the crowd made me clench my fists inside the pockets of my heavy shearling coat. Graves continued, staying well back from the fiery twins' reach, seemingly aware of the danger she posed. "This one's got fire, might need some breaking in," he jeered, pointing to the one on the left. "The other is docile, perfect for household duties, cooking, cleaning, and comforting." He was talking about them like they were animals, or worse, objects for amusement. The casual cruelty of it, happening on the day celebrating the birth of a savior, made me sick to my core. "We'll start the bidding at $50 for the pair," Graves shouted, banging a gavel against a crate. "Do I hear 50? Hands shot up around the crowd. "60, cried a voice from the back. "75, shouted another. 100. I watched in horror as the bidding escalated. These weren't ranchers looking for honest workers. These were men with darker intentions, men like Bartholomew Pike, a mine owner known for working his labors until they dropped, and a man named Reddington, whose reputation with women was a stain on the entire town. I could see the lust and greed in their faces. The fiery twin turned her head, scanning the crowd with desperation masked as hatred. Her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, time seemed to stop. We stared at each other across the snowy, huddled mass of men. I saw something in her gaze that hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't a plea for help, she was far too proud to beg a white man for anything. It was a challenge. It was a question aimed directly at my soul. Are you going to stand there and watch like the rest of them, or are you going to do something? 150, called out Pike, stepping forward, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. 175, countered Reddington, spitting tobacco juice onto the pristine white ground. The bidding continued to climb, and with each increase, my anger grew, transforming from a simmering heat to a roaring boil. These were human beings, daughters of someone, sisters to each other, not property to be bought and sold to the highest bidder. The gentler twin had begun to tremble violently, her lips turning blue from the cold and fear, though she still held her head high, while her sister's jaw was set in a line of grim determination, ready to fight until the end. 250. Reddington shouted, and the crowd fell silent. It was an exorbitant amount, more money than most people in the territory saw in 6 months of hard labor. Graves looked around expectantly, a greedy grin splitting his face. 250 going once. Going twice. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe it was the memory of Clara, who always fought for the underdog. Maybe it was the hypocrisy of the Christmas season. Or maybe it was simply the fundamental wrongness of what I was witnessing. $300, I heard myself say. My voice was low, but it carried through the cold air like the crack of a whip. Every head in the crowd turned toward me. The silence was absolute. Graves' eyes lit up with avarice while Reddington glared at me with open hostility. Well, Graves grinned, tipping his hat. Julian Thorne enters the bidding. The Shadow Creek recluse speaks. 300 from the gentleman in the back. Reddington's face flushed red with anger. 325. 350, I replied without hesitation, stepping forward, my hand resting casually near my holster. 400. Reddington snarled, his hand twitching toward his own belt. The crowd murmured, excited by the bidding war, sensing the violence simmering beneath the surface. I looked again at the twins in their thin grey Keongsams, shivering in the snow, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. $500, I said clearly. The crowd gasped. $500 was a fortune. It was the price of a good herd of cattle, or a small house. Reddington looked like he wanted to continue bidding, but even his greed had limits, and perhaps he saw the look in my eye, the look that said I would pay any price, in gold or lead. Going once, going twice, sold. Graves banged his gavel with a finality that echoed off the nearby buildings. The twins go to Mr. Thorne for $500. As I pushed through the crowd to complete the transaction, the sea of men parted, their whispers following me like a wake. What's a killer like Thorne want with 2 women? Thought he was still mourning his wife. Man's got particular tastes, I reckon. I ignored them all, my focus entirely on the two women shivering on the platform. I approached Graves, who was practically rubbing his hands together with glee. "Congratulations, Mr. Thorne. Excellent choice. These two will serve you well." I handed over the pouch of gold coins without a word, the metal heavy in my hand but light compared to the burden on my conscience. I turned to look at my purchase. The word stuck in my throat like bile. I had just bought two human beings. The fact that I had done it to save them from worse fates didn't make the transaction any less horrifying. The sisters stood watching me with unreadable expressions. I moved to the post where they were tethered and used the key Graves tossed me to unlock their chains. The metal clattered to the frozen wood of the platform. "What are your names?" I asked, my voice rough from the cold and the tension. The protective twin eyed me warily, rubbing her wrists where the iron had bitten into her skin. She placed herself slightly in front of her sister. "I am Mai," she said, her English accented but surprisingly clear and sharp. "This is my sister, Lin." "Well, Mai and Lin," I said, unbuttoning my heavy shearling coat and draping it over Lin's trembling shoulders, then taking the spare blanket from my steel bag for Mai. "We have a long ride ahead of us." As we walked toward my wagon, Sheriff Maddock approached, blocking my path with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Thorne," he said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "Hope you know what you're doing. Foreigners can be unpredictable. Especially the wild ones." "I can handle myself, Sheriff," I replied, my eyes locked on his. "Just remember, they're your property now," Maddox sneered. "Anything happens, any trouble they cause in this town, it's on your head. I won't hesitate to put a bullet in a savage if she steps out of line." "Property?" The word made my skin crawl. I stepped closer to him, invading his space. "Get out of my way, Maddock." He hesitated, then stepped aside, spitting on the ground near my boots. I ushered the women onto the wagon seat. As we rolled out of Silver Creek, the snow began to fall harder, transforming the world into a blur of white. I caught Mai's reflection in the side mirror. She was whispering urgently to Lin in a dialect I didn't understand, probably Cantonese. I couldn't blame them for being terrified. They had just been sold to a stranger with a gun. We rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds being the creak of the wagon wheels and the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves. The wind picked up, howling around us. Finally, Lin spoke up, her voice as soft as the falling snow, barely audible over the wind. Where are you taking us?" I looked back at them, these two young women huddled together under the coat and blanket, their lives completely upended. "Home," I said simply. "I'm taking you home." I saw confusion in their eyes, but also the first glimmer of something that might have been hope, or perhaps just disbelief. The journey was treacherous. The storm worsened, turning into a white-out blizzard. At one point, the wagon wheel slipped into a deep rut hidden by the snow. I had to jump down and heave against the wood, the icy mud sucking at my boots. To my surprise, Mai jumped down beside me. Without a word, she put her shoulder to the wheel, her silk shoe soaking instantly in the freezing slush. Together, with a grunt of effort, we leveraged the wagon free. She looked at me, panting, snow clinging to her eyelashes. In that moment of shared struggle, a tiny seed of respect was planted. The Shadow Creek Ranch sat in a valley surrounded by red stone cliffs dusted with white, creating a stark and beautiful contrast. It was a good spread, 2,000 acres of grazing land, a sturdy timber house, and all the outbuildings a working ranch needed. I'd built it with Clara, dreaming of the family we'd raised there. Now it felt too big and too empty for one man. As we approached the house, Elena, my housekeeper, came out onto the porch, wrapped in a shawl. Elena was a widow in her 50s who had worked for Clara and me for almost 10 years. She was the only family I had left. She took one look at the two Chinese women in the back of my wagon, shivering and blue-lipped, and crossed herself. "Madre de Dios, Senor Julian, what have you done?" she whispered as I brought the wagon to a halt. "Something I should have done a long time ago," I said, climbing down. I walked around to the back and reached up to help them down. I hesitated, staring at my hand as if it were a trap, before finally accepting it. Her skin was ice cold. Lynn was more trusting, or perhaps just too exhausted to resist, allowing me to lift her down. "Elena," I said, "could you prepare the guest rooms? Start a fire in the hearth, and find them something warm to wear. Anything of Clara's that might fit." "Guests?" Elena's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "You bought them at the auction?" "That's right." "Guests?" I turned to Maya and Lynn, who were watching this exchange with growing confusion. "Let me make something clear," I said, looking each of them in the eye to ensure they understood. "You are not my property. You are not my slaves. What happened in Silver Creek was a travesty. You are free to leave whenever you want, though I advise waiting until the storm passes, or you'll freeze to death before you reach the tree line. But if you choose to stay, you will be treated as members of this household, with all the respect and dignity that entails." I rubbed her wrists where the chains had been, her eyes searching my face for the lie she was sure was there. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why spend a fortune on us if not to use us?" "Because," I said, the words coming from a place deep in my heart that I'd thought was dead, "sometimes the right thing to do is the only thing that lets a man sleep at night." That night, as the blizzard raged outside, the house felt different. There were other heartbeats under my roof for the first time since Clara died. I sat in my study, nursing a whiskey, wondering what I had gotten myself into. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke before dawn, as was my habit. When I went downstairs, the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, mixed with something else, something floral and spicy. I found Elena in the kitchen, fussing over the twins. They were dressed in some of Clara's old wool dresses, pinned and cinched to fit their slender frames. The grey silk kyongsams were gone, likely being washed or burned. I still moved like a warrior, alert and ready for danger, her eyes tracking my every movement. Lynn, however, seemed to be observing everything with a quiet, absorbing intelligence. "You speak English well," I remarked as I poured myself a cup of black coffee. "Our father insisted," I said, standing protectively near Lynn. "He worked on the railroad. He believed understanding the language of the ghosts, the white men, was the only way to survive here." "Where is he now?" "Buried under a rock slide in the Sierra Nevada," Lynn said softly, her eyes downcast. "After he died, the company claimed he owed debts for food and lodging. The debts were transferred to us. That is how we ended up in chains." "Debts of the dead should not bind the living," I said, anger flaring in my chest again. "In this land, the poor are always bound," I countered sharply. Over the next few weeks, a fragile routine developed. Elena took charge of helping the sisters settle in, treating them like long-lost nieces rather than strangers. Lynn began to open up, her gentle nature shining through. She took over much of the cooking, asking Elena to buy ginger and garlic from the mercantile, introducing flavors that transformed our simple ranch rations into feasts. She hummed traditional songs while she worked, filling the silence of the house with melody. I was different. She remained distant, suspicious. She spent her time outside, despite the cold. She watched me work the horses, her eyes analyzing my technique. One afternoon, I was struggling with a young, spooked stallion in the corral. He was rearing and kicking, dangerous and terrified. I was about to give up when I climbed the fence. "You are fighting him," she called out. "He feels your anger." "He's stubborn," I grunted, wiping sweat from my brow despite the chill. "He is afraid." Like us, I dropped into the corral. Before I could shout a warning, she approached the stallion. She didn't use a rope or a whip. She used her voice, low and rhythmic, and her hands. She moved in a way that was almost a dance. Within 10 minutes, the stallion was nuzzling her palm. I watched in awe. "Where did you learn that?" "My grandfather trained horses for the Emperor's cavalry," she said, stroking the animal's nose. "Before the wars. Before we lost everything. You have a gift, Mai." She looked at me, and for the first time, the hostility in her eyes was replaced by a grudging respect. "You have good horses, Julian Thorne. But they need a softer hand. Then maybe you should handle them." From that day on, Mai took over the stables. We worked side by side, repairing fences and tending the herd. I taught her how to shoot a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver, realizing that in this country, a woman needed to know how to kill to survive. She was a natural marksman, her steady hands and sharp eyes making her lethal at 50 yards. The real test of our growing bond came in late January. Sheriff Maddock rode up to the house with 2 deputies, their breath steaming in the air. I saw them coming and stepped onto the porch, my hand resting near my holster. Mai and Lynn watched from the upstairs window, their shadows visible against the glass. "Thorne," Maddock called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk." "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Got reports of trouble. Neighbors say they saw 2 Chinese women stealing supplies from a homestead near the ridge." "That's a lie, and we both know it," I said calmly. "My nearest neighbor is 10 miles away through deep snow drifts. Neither of them has left this property." "You calling me a liar, Thorne?" "I'm saying your information is incorrect." Maddock's eyes narrowed, his hand drifting to his gun. "I need to search the property. Make sure you're keeping your acquisitions under proper control. We can't have savages running wild. They aren't savages, and they aren't property. They are guests. And you don't have a warrant." "I don't need a warrant for runaway chattels." Suddenly, the front door opened. Mai stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a heavy duster coat I had given her, and in her hands, she held the Winchester repeater, the barrel pointed strictly at the ground but ready to rise. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady and cold as ice. Maddock sneered, though his horse danced nervously. "The savage is armed." "That's illegal." "I am a resident of this ranch," Mai said, her English crisp. "And you are trespassing. Mr. Thorne asked you to leave." Maddock looked at me, then at Mai, and then at the upper window where Lynn was now visible, holding a shotgun Elena had likely given her. He did the math. 3 against 3, and he knew my reputation. "This isn't over, Thorne," he spat. "You're making enemies you can't afford." He turned his horse and galloped away, his deputies following. After they left, I turned to Mai. She was trembling slightly, the adrenaline fading. "Thank you," I said, "for standing with me." She looked at me, her dark eyes searching mine. "You stood for us on the auction block. We stand for you now." "Why did you really buy us, Julian?" she asked, finally dropping her guard completely. "Men don't spend $500 on strangers just for kindness. Not in this world." I looked out at the snowy peaks. Because 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered. My wife, my unborn child, my purpose. I've been living like a dead man walking. When I saw you 2 standing there, proud despite the chains, I saw life. I saw a fire I thought had gone out in the world. I wanted to save it. Lynn joined us on the porch, slipping her hand into Mai's. "We were drowning," she said softly. "And you pulled us out of the water. You gave us a home when we had none." As winter slowly gave way to the first hints of spring, the bond between the 3 of us grew into something profound. I found myself falling in love, not just with a woman, but with the unit they represented. Mai was the fire that challenged me, the strength I admired, the warrior spirit that matched my own. Lynn was the water that soothed me, the gentleness I craved, the domestic peace I thought I'd lost forever. They were 2 halves of a perfect whole, and I realized with a startling clarity that I couldn't imagine my life without either of them. But peace in the West is rarely everlasting. The snows melted, revealing the mud and the sins of the past. In early spring, Cornelius Graves returned. He didn't come alone. He brought Bartholomew Pike and a posse of 6 hired guns. I was in the barn repairing a harness when Elena screamed. I grabbed my repeater and ran to the house. Graves sat on his horse in the yard, flanked by men holding torches. Pike was there, looking smug and vicious. "Thorne!" Graves shouted. "We have a business dispute that needs settling. State it and leave." I yelled back, positioning myself behind a water trough, leveling my rifle. "It seems those twins had a prior claim on them," Graves lied smoothly. "Mr. Pike here has a contract stating their father promised them to him before he died as payment for the debts. The auction was premature. I'm here to repossess the merchandise." "That's a lie," I shouted from the upstairs window. "Our father hated this man. He would never sell us." "Come out, girls," Pike leered, waving a pistol. "Or we burn the house down with you inside." "You have 10 seconds to get off my land," I warned, cocking the hammer of my rifle. "Or I start emptying saddles." "You're outnumbered, Gunslinger," Graves laughed. 7 against 1. "Be reasonable." 5 seconds. I took a deep breath. I was ready to die to protect them. I lined up my sights on Graves' chest. But before I could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out, not from me, and not from the posse. It came from the ridge above the ranch. One of Pike's men cried out and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. We all looked up. Doc Abernathy, the town physician and a man of secret conscience, was riding down the slope. Behind him rode 4 men with silver stars pinned to their chests. "Federal marshals." "Drop your weapons," the lead marshal shouted, his voice booming like thunder. "Cornelius Graves, Bartholomew Pike, you are under arrest for human trafficking, fraud, and the kidnapping of foreign nationals." Graves tried to turn his horse to flee, but the marshals were on him in seconds. The hired guns threw down their weapons, having no desire to fight federal law. As they were handcuffed and dragged away, Doc Abernathy rode up to me, tipping his hat. Elena sent word when she saw the dust cloud coming up the valley. "We got here as fast as we could. These marshals have been tracking Graves' illegal slave ring from California to Texas." With the villains taken away, a heavy weight that had hung over the ranch all winter finally lifted. The air felt cleaner, lighter. That evening, we sat by the fire, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Lynn pulled a thick envelope from her pocket. "The marshals brought this," she said. "It was stuck in the mail office in Silver Creek all winter, hidden by the sheriff. It was a letter from a law firm in San Francisco. It detailed a settlement regarding their father's death, a wrongful death suit filed by a benevolent association, and, more importantly, a patent he had filed for a railway coupling device years ago. It had finally been approved and purchased by the Union Pacific. The value was staggering. $40,000. "You're rich," I said, feeling a sudden, aching hollow in my chest. "You can go anywhere. San Francisco, New York, back to China. You can live like queens." Mai looked at me, her face unreadable. "And leave our home." "This isn't your home," I said, trying to be noble, trying to do the right thing one last time. "You were forced here. You were prisoners who became guests. Now you are free women." "No," Lynn said, stepping closer, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "We were brought here by a man who saved us when the world wanted to devour us. We choose to stay. But with that money, you could have anything. We want to invest it here," Mai said, her voice firm. "We want to expand the ranch. Buy the land next to the creek. Build a sanctuary." "A sanctuary?" "For others like us," Lynn explained. "Chinese laborers cast off by the railroad, natives displaced from their lands. A place where people are not sold like sheep. But there is one condition," Mai added, a blush rising on her cheeks. "What?" The twins looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that needed no words. Then they both turned to me. "Marry us," Mai said boldly. I blinked, stunned into silence. "Marry? Both of you?" "We are one soul in 2 bodies, Lynn explained gently, taking my hand. "We have never been apart, and we never will be. We both love you, Julian. We have seen your heart. We know you love us too. Do not try to deny it. It isn't legal, I stammered, though my heart was pounding with a joy I hadn't felt in decades. The law. The law sold us like sheep on Christmas Eve, Mai said fiercely. The law allowed men like Graves to exist. We do not care for the law of this land. We care for the truth of our hearts. Will you be our husband? Will you accept both the fire and the water? I looked at these two incredible women, the warrior who guarded my back and the healer who soothed my soul. I realized I loved them equally, and to separate them would be to destroy the very thing that made them whole. Yes, I said, my voice thick with emotion, pulling them both into an embrace. Yes, I will. A month later, on a warm spring day, a small ceremony was held in the valley. Uncle Zhao, an elder from the Chinese community in the next territory who had heard of the twins' fortune and safety, came to officiate. It wasn't a wedding recognized by the state of Arizona, but it was recognized by the only people who mattered. Do you, Julian Thorne, take these women to be your wives, to protect and honor them? Uncle Zhao asked. I do, I said, holding a hand of each sister. And do you, Amai and Lin, take this man to be your husband? We do, they said in unison. As we stood there, the identical twins in beautiful red silk kyongsams they had commissioned, contrasting with the vibrant green of the valley, I realized how far we had come from that snowy auction block. We had built a family out of broken pieces. We used their inheritance to build that sanctuary, a place where the outcasts of the West could find a home. We faced prejudice, sure. People whispered. But we had each other, and on the Shadow Creek Ranch, that was enough. The Gunslinger and the twins, a family forged in snow and blood, proving that love has no boundaries, no single form, and that sometimes, being taken home is just the beginning of the adventure. The story of Julian, Mai, and Lin serves as a profound testament to the fact that family is defined not by blood or societal norms, but by the unwavering commitment to protect and nurture one another. It teaches us that true strength lies in the courage to stand against injustice, even when the whole world seems to be watching in silence, and that redemption is always possible for those willing to open their hearts. The narrative highlights that love can manifest in unexpected forms, requiring us to look past our differences and past traumas to find unity and healing. By choosing compassion over cruelty, the characters demonstrate that even in the harshest winters of our lives, hope can blossom if we are brave enough to cultivate it. Their journey reminds us that our past does not dictate our future, and that forgiveness, of others and of ourselves, is the key to moving forward. Ultimately, the story illustrates that home is not a place, but a feeling of safety and acceptance found in the people who choose to stand by our side. What did you think of Julian's decision to defy the law and save the twins, and their unconventional choice to build a life together? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story of the Wild West, please subscribe for more tales of courage and romance. Thank you for watching.